So I'm Tom Stenzel. I'm currently Executive Director of the Controlled Environment Agriculture Alliance, CEA Alliance. I know many of you and many of the folks here at OGS and Western Growers from my time at United Fresh Produce Association, where I was CEO for about 30 years. So now that I've retired, I've taken a new job. So I'm glad to be back in Salinas here in Monterey with so many of my good friends. We've got a great panel for you today. Two producers, CEA producers, who have very different growing systems, so that's going to be interesting. And Molly Tabor from Robinson Fresh, who's one of our partners. Robinson Fresh, both a buyer of CEA produce and also a supply chain partner. So before I ask each of them to introduce themselves, I want to give you a little bit of grounding in what is controlled environment agriculture. So all of us as growers try to control as many variables as we can. That doesn't matter whether you're growing field, outside, indoor, whatever. But moving indoors provides an opportunity to control more of those variables than we're able to do outside. Consider the weather. So climate, rain, heat, cold, all of those things that we're controlling when we move indoors into either a high-tech glass greenhouse or indoor vertical farming. We're not talking about hoop houses or shade houses. This is strictly indoor, glass enclosed, or indoor vertical. Other inputs that we control. We pick our growing medium. So it's not necessarily just the regular field grown, but you choose what you want to grow in for which crop, and then irrigation water is something that's highly controlled as well. So the water systems for all of the indoor growers. Animal intrusion, obviously we don't have deer running through the farms that are indoors. The ability to control plant pests, another area where it's particularly important in controlled environment. And last, I would say it's generally a much more sanitary environment. Think about the produce processing facilities, the lettuce and greens processing facilities, and then you put a grow room in that same type of setting. So you're creating very much more controlled variables. So that's a quick grounding in what we talk about as controlled environment agriculture. Indoor high-tech glass greenhouses, indoor vertical farm. So with that, let me ask each of the panelists to introduce themselves, and we'll start at the end, please.
Sure. I'm Matt Ryan, the CEO of Solely Organic, and as the name suggests, we see ourselves as organic farmers because that's what, in fact, we do. You may have known us years ago as Shenandoah growers. We started out as field growers. In fact, we still are field growers, and we intend to stay that way as well, because at the end of the day, CEA is just another way to grow organic produce in our book. And we see CEA as an unlock for many of our core crops because they actually grow better. We're in the herb business. We are the national leader in fresh herbs and in potted herbs as well, too. And most of the herbs that we grow will actually grow better indoors. And by better, I mean better quality and more efficiently, i.e. cheaper. That's why we're doing it. And the same goes for leafy greens as well, too. We are in the midst of a major transition, building many big new facilities that will allow us to grow in soil, which unlocks organic for us indoors.
Great, thanks, Matt. Rama?
Good morning, I'm Arama Kukutai. I'm the Chief Executive of Plenty. From New Zealand originally, grew up in a dairy farming family on the west coast of the North Island. I'm a dairy agronomist by background. These days, though, we are doing farming in probably about the most high-tech way possible. And so for those of you who know the classic agronomy formula, D by E by M, really we're focused on controlling the environment in order to unlock the genetic potential of all of the crops that we're working on. Just are about to start shipping out of what we think is the world's largest vertical farm by output in Los Angeles, Compton. Just broken ground on our first East Coast facility, which will be growing strawberries in Richmond, Virginia. And we have about 100 people in plant science working on crop varieties. So many of the crops outdoors have been mastered, whether it's leafy greens, whether it's the myriad of tomato varieties, peppers, strawberries, and so on. But no one's really mastered, in our opinion, unlocking the genetic potential of crops indoors. I think this is a really exciting new area as a technology company to focus on unlocking. We're building both farms for ourselves. We're also building farms for partners. Some of you may have seen the press release around the work we do at Walmart, who are one of our key strategic partners. Also working very closely with Driscoll's. And last to say, fantastic, excited to be here at West Growers meeting. Thank you today. Thank you Paul. Thank you Tony. Great relationship.
Molly.
Perfect. Good morning, everybody. My name is Molly Tabron, and I work with Robinson Fresh. Robinson Fresh is a division of C.H. Robinson. Many of you are probably familiar with C.H. Robinson, the largest third-party logistics company in North America, and we have the privilege of working for many of you hauling freight through the Western Growers Association. Robinson Fresh has a vision to feed the world through two things: fresh produce procurement and distribution, and complex supply chain solutions. So we're on the services side, I would say, of the fresh produce industry. My responsibility is in leading the supply team. I'm based out of Eden Prairie, Minnesota, and it was really nice to be here, although it was, I think, warmer in Minnesota than it was here when I arrived. But I'll go back to 7 inches of snow, so this is really a treat. But I've done a variety of things in my career at Robinson. I've led the finance team. I handled procurement of citrus and melons. Today I'm responsible for all of the categories my supply team purchases. It's conventional, organic, CEA, you name it. But really we're experts in the distribution of those categories, thinking about how do we do really complex supply chains and bring them all together so that retailers, food service companies, wholesalers have year-round supply of those where it doesn't typically exist.
Super. Well, greetings and thank you all for joining us today. So I think our first question, and Matt, you kind of touched on it when you said that you used to be an outdoor grower, you're still going to be an outdoor grower. What made you decide to move indoors?
Well, it was not me personally. It was people that were there at the company long before I was. So 12 to 14 years ago is when we first started getting into CEA on the greenhouse side. We now mostly are vertical, but it was a greenhouse at that time. And it was really a couple of core issues. One is the cost of growing outdoors was a challenge, especially with things like labor costs, which even back then, as well as other inputs. But beyond that, probably the thing that we saw coming was what was happening to climate. And the challenges of having a consistent, reliable source of good quality organic produce was something that simply was becoming more challenging. And we knew we had some time, so we took our time, gradually reinvested profits of the business into developing CEA technology, including our own proprietary organic fertilizer technology. We make our own precision organic fertilizer inside all of our facilities, which unlocks the ability to grow in soil. Took us a while to do that. And now, as a result, we're starting to see great cost and terrific quality facilities across the nation where we can grow close to market and deliver reliably and steadily for our customers.
Great. Arma, how about you? I think you said Plenty was a technology company. How does the technology come into farming?
Well, we've always had technology, really, well, certainly in the last 200 years. Growing indoors is not a new thing. Actually, I had a chance to the very first glass house, think of commercial production in Amsterdam. But it was actually interesting to stand there and say, well, 200 years ago, people were growing tulips in here. They were protecting the crop, very delicate, very valuable crop, from environment. It's not a new idea. What is new in terms of what we're doing is the level of precision and control we can bring to growing indoors. We have control at the plant level, which blows my mind still as an agronomist thinking about not having control at the field level, to have control at the plant level. And why is that interesting? Well, it allows us to get maximization yield. The Compton facility is roughly 100,000 square feet and will put out 2 million kilograms of product on that footprint. So it is anywhere from 6 to 10 to 4x level of output that is possible on a per unit basis. But that only really matters if, as Matt said, you can produce reliably, high quality produce at the right price. And so we've put a lot of our investment into figuring out how to drive down the cost curves of growing a complete factor of production. So sort of refer to this as the Moore's Law of lettuce. But essentially what does that mean? Driving down the CapEx per kg, driving out OpEx per kg, and I think importantly, and this has always been a function of indoor, but it's becoming even more so with breakthroughs in vertical, the ability to solve for supply mismatches. In other words, seasonality. So what is it worth for us to have, for example, peak season freshness strawberries in the northeast in winter? It's worth a lot. We were just in the United Arab Emirates. We've had a lot of international outreach. This is a country that imports almost all of its food, including all of the fresh produce. Actually, lots of Driscoll's products and others on shelves there, but they all had to be flown in. Not exactly the most sustainable way to feed your local population. So how do we bring more food into localised settings? And lastly, I would just say, I think, just to echo what Matt said too, we see ourselves as a technology package that's part of a broader solution for food security that includes outdoor farming. I don't see outdoor farming going away. I know some of my colleagues in Silicon Valley have sort of preached that somehow indoor is going to do away with outdoor farming. It's nonsense. Clearly that's not the case. We need all the tools we can get our hands on in order to sustainably feed the planet, but we see ourselves as providing a technology solution that allows us to do some things that we can't do outdoors. And actually, interestingly, some of our closest partners are going to be people who bring expertise in logistics and farming and production. We see ourselves as being a technology solution in partnership with a lot of outdoor growers. One of the reasons why we're members of Western Growers ourselves.
Yeah. No, that's good. So Molly, from a Robinson Fresh standpoint, why do you care about CEA? Why is the company interested in this space?
I think these two touched on a couple of really important points, but we care about it first and foremost because we're focused on our customers and their concerns. And having food security and thinking about some of the challenges, even that I heard yesterday, that we talked about weather impacts, we talked about drought conditions, we talked about weed pressures, disease pressures, and one of the things that's interesting about CEA is it handles and addresses some of those in a different way than we have in the past. So I think it'd be silly for a company like ours to ignore that. In fact, I think it's a really important part. I too agree. I don't think field-grown agriculture is going away, but how and where high-tech agriculture fit into that, I think is still being developed. There's not a week that goes by that I don't talk to somebody who is either in the CEA business looking to start a farm, varying stages of that. And one of the things that I notice is that you've got tons of money, right, being pumped into this space. There's not really a great need for capital. There's a ton of money in this space. There's also a lot of science in this space. Most of these organizations are focused on the technology. They're doing very innovative things with seed, with automation, with robotics. But one of the things that's lacking where I think a company like Robinson really fits in is expertise in supply chain and in produce. Things that for many of you, I've had some conversations yesterday, many of the things that are really obvious to you that makes a buyer buy when you think of what makes them put an item on a shelf, it's new. These are people that are not in produce. And it's, I can think back to a couple conversations this year that I had with, one farm that wanted to focus on a single item, red grape tomatoes. And they could produce them like crazy, and they were fantastic. But what retailer is going to put one single snacking tomato on a shelf? They're just not going to merchandise it that way, nor does it make logistical sense, right? You've got pallet volume at most, and so when you think about the cost of transportation and getting that to where it needs to be, it doesn't make sense. We had another farm that, felt like they could grow eggplant really well. And I said, well, okay, back up a second. Talk me through the yields that you'd produce in a facility like this. I said, you're going to produce more eggplant than the entire United States demands in a year. So some of those things where just because you can grow it doesn't mean it makes sense, and doesn't mean a buyer's going to say yes even if you do a fantastic job. So that's where I think Robinson fits into that space really well.
No, I think that's really smart. In my experience, joining the CEA Alliance here this year, you see a number of companies coming in, and it's golly gee whiz, look what we can do.
Yes.
But then you come to the marketplace and you start dealing with retailers and you start understanding pricing models.
Yes.
And all of a sudden, just because you can do it doesn't mean you're going to be successful.
Right.
So that kind of advice I think is really important. So I'd say probably the first crops grown indoors really successfully were the tomato vines, cucumbers, peppers in glass greenhouses, and have pretty much become the standard now. In the vertical farm space, it's been leafy greens, and even Matt, you're more herbs and greens that way. Some now talk about strawberries. I think, Arma, your investment coming up. What crops do you all see in the future that get us beyond the tomatoes and leafy greens? Either one.
Sure. I'll start, and I'm sure hopefully we'll have different ideas, because that would be the beauty of this. We have different ideas here. The thing about what we see going on right now is actually CEA has only tackled a very small part of the leafy green and the herb business. So yes, basil, but what else? Aside from us, nobody else is really doing, or successfully, any other crop. And the vast majority of what's going on within CEA is, again, spring mint, sort of baby greens, as opposed to the larger segment of that market. So I think within both herb and leafy greens, there is a ton of runway right now versus the capacity that's out there if we can just get after some of the other crops that grow well. And in fact, that we think that growing in soil is an unlock for a lot of that, because that allows us to tackle some of the more notoriously difficult crops that can't be grown as well with other CEA systems. So we're all over that. But beyond that, we have a large R&D effort going on right now to look at other things. And there are a lot of crops out there that are not grown in greenhouses right now. And our big criteria for doing it is that, if it can grow in soil, we can grow it indoors. It has to be quick to ripen, quick to mature, and it has to be small in size, because you are dealing with the economics of capital investment. So cherry trees, corn, But there's a lot of other stuff that fit a broad range of small, fast to mature, and that goes well beyond food. It goes into medicinals, it goes into other sort of spices and things like that. Lots and lots of opportunity out there.
Yeah, I agree with a lot of that. But just to maybe take this in a slightly different direction, as you say, Matt, for diversity here, we have a significant investment in plant sciences. Because I think I might have mentioned, 100 plus people working in this space. And that's because there's multiple different approaches to mastering genetics. So in leafy greens, this is actually a pretty easy set of crops to grow, although some of the trickier ones we've had to focus effort on mastering. So we'll be shipping spinach this week. I believe we're the first vertical farm player to really master and figure out how to grow spinach economically at scale. We also are working on how we monetize the full plant. So our dark greens, because we don't grow in soil, we can verify a zero heavy metal product as well too. So we've got baby food and processed food manufacturers coming to us saying, hey, looks like you can meet a spec that no one else can in terms of being able to guarantee zero heavy metal production. So there's another way of monetizing the full plant. These are not obviously going to be in a salad tub. This is going to be a processed branded ingredient going into a CPG end product, just as a for instance. Strawberries, most people don't hear how tricky strawberries are to grow. We've been working, it's why in that case we selected a genetics partner in Driscoll's, who we believe to have one of the outstanding genetics collections in berries generally and in strawberries specifically, and have done screening work to identify strawberry varieties that can grow to peak season freshness, to superb levels of quality, so very high bricks, within an indoor facility that is, again, the Richmond facility will be targeting to produce about 2 million kilograms a year. So again, not the odd tray here or there, but significant and real supply. And then on the pipeline side, we're actually curious if people have the opportunity. I'd love to chat after the session here and hear what others think would be interesting crops to pursue indoors, but we're doing work on vining crops. So we have at our Wyoming R&D facility product pipeline team working on everything from, obviously we're doing tomatoes, we're actually breeding our own dwarf varieties of sort of essentially heirloom snackers. So these are not commodity slices, these are specialized cherries and snackers. But we have work we've done on crops, everything from raspberries, so the rest of the berry cluster, I could see us, for example, also doing something, I'll be parochial here and say kiwi fruit, for example, is possible, we think indoors. But a last point I make here is that there are no free lunches, right? So when people talk about doing R&D, R&D takes years and costs millions of dollars to do properly, and it requires large teams to do genetics work. It's all shots on goal. So we're fortunate we've raised a lot of capital. We have the resources to go after this, but we believe winning on assortment is going to be important. So just having leafy greens farms for us is really not the objective. It's to be able to build a platform that can grow a wide variety of crops, particularly taking advantage of supply mismatches, particularly taking advantage of crops that consumers want more of that are not available year round and that have high value. Because these are expensive facilities to build, over time they're going to come down in cost, but today they're much more expensive than greenhouses to build and operate. And so we need to look for the right premium crop opportunities.
Molly, I had not heard eggplant as one of
Me
the
either.
options.
Yeah.
Any other crop that you've had people come to you and say, hey, I think I could do this? What do you see?
I mean, there are very few that people say they can't do. I mean, we've even discussed bananas indoors, which blows my mind based on the height. But, I agree with a lot of what these two gentlemen have said. I think it really comes down to the varieties. The companies that I see doing this really well can do a variety of different things, right? They're not specializing in one single thing. They're thinking about what makes somebody say yes. And Matt, you touched on the baby greens portion. There's people who are doing leafy greens, but it is very much a baby leafy green. And as a consumer, when you think about even just like the mouthfeel, right, of a crunchy romaine, it's not always the same. And so I would say more than the different varieties is really unlocking what does the consumer want? What are they after? What do they desire today and tomorrow? And thinking about how do we do that better? Because a lot of those varieties can be grown on systems, but they're not because it takes so many days, and the days on system just don't make sense when you think about the ROI you need based on the investment put into these facilities. And so that's what I think a lot of companies are focused on is how do we do that? How do we make sure that we have not only a competitive cost product, but also when you think about the quality and consistency that a consumer gets with field-grown product, that's something we've got to tackle.
We spoke earlier about the relationship between indoor and outdoor growers. I think, Parma, you mentioned it, that indoor is not going to replace, and think one of the things that's really important is we all recognize we're part of this great food system and agriculture. I think back to the early days of organic, since we're in the organic summit here, where organic growers were kind of unique. They were individual. And today, organic is part of the mainstream. Most growers have conventional and organic, and depending on what markets they're serving and how they operate. Do you see that in the future of indoor, that we may be part of also field agriculture as well?
Absolutely. In fact, we own farms, and we are going to continue to grow things outdoors. Take the herb category. Most of the volume of herbs can be grown indoors. We know that. So we actually can grow a lot of different crops. By the way, all the herbs are different. They're not the same thing, and they don't grow the same way. But there's something like rosemary. Yes, we do grow it indoors, but my God, the farms in California do a better job of growing rosemary outside. It ships well. It's fantastic. Why would we waste that indoor space? We're capacity constrained on growing something like rosemary. And yeah, you can spend a lot of R&D figuring out how to grow bay leaves or lemongrass indoors, and I promise you we're not going to do that because those things actually work really well outside. So there's going to be a natural balance of what grows better indoors. And from our point of view, I'm a consumerist at heart. Long before I was at Soli, I spent years leading marketing at Starbucks and brand at Disney, so staying laser focused on what people want is important. And we do see something important. I want to say this in organic. It is what people care about. Even with the slowdown this year in organic sales, it's all about one thing. It's about cost. People would love to buy organic if they could, but it's a little expensive. So we fundamentally believe we have to solve for how can we deliver that top quality organic produce at a mainstream price point. And it all comes down to that price value equation, always in the food business. So I was delighted when somebody from my childhood, I grew up in upstate New York, came to me and said, I just saw it was baby greens in a supermarket in Wegmans, and it was $2.99 for a 4-ounce clamshell. It was like I went to California and got that kind of produce for that price. That's what we have to now. And then she went back over and over again to see if it was there, and it's constantly not on the shelf. That's another problem we have because we can't supply enough to the market. When you hit that value price point, consumers recognize it. Quality for the right price, that's what all of us, growers indoors or out, need to do. And that's how we're all going to win in the long run. So yes, I agree with your point.
Yeah, I think there's just a couple of basic realities. Matt's just touched on one around around economics, right? Around the need to have a product in market at a price that consumers can afford to pay, and that where they gauge that what they're paying for is worth it. And organics has enjoyed a premium, and that's obviously across all categories. You can see why that has had, to some extent, maybe a capping effect on the total market size. And I think every grower in this room, I'm sure, has thought, how can I unlock more demand for my product? I think flipping for a second to the supply side, though, one of the realities is that Mediterranean growing zones are limited around the world. New Zealand's another one that's got pockets, for example, to do this. There's 300,000 acres of kiwi fruit in New Zealand. That's it. That's pretty much what you have to grow for in terms of global supply. So what if you can unlock more supply, to your point, Matt, at a price point that is, affordable? Well, it's clearly going to unlock a lot of opportunity in the market. Also, how do we change or influence consumer buyer behavior and patterns of consumption? Do I stop wanting peak season strawberries in New York just because it's winter? No, I do not. But it's hard to find that product at the level of quality that I enjoyed during the summer months. So this idea of, again, balancing the portfolio of products that consumers want, unlocking supply constraints, I think are some of the things that indoor brings to the broader conversation in the category, which is why you're seeing stalwart players in this space from the outdoor world invest in indoor, whether that's Taylor Farms, whether that's the Driscoll's operations, and many more. I won't try and name all the players who are investing in this. It's obviously it's not a new thing on the greenhouse side, but I think vertical starts to unlock new opportunities from a technology standpoint, from a crop standpoint, that weren't there previously.
You make an important point that unlocking that supply that's fresh and has the taste and all the consumer attributes may be a key to helping us increase consumption overall, for everybody in agriculture. So that's interesting. So a good panel needs a little controversy. So I'm going to ask a controversial question. Organics has become kind of the standard, the consumer expectation. Everybody knows what it is. They love it, as you said, Matt. If you can afford it. Some people are saying indoors is organic 2.0, moving indoors, pesticide-free, a lot of the attributes more sustainable. Perhaps it's similar to regenerative agriculture for outside, that it's organic 2.0. What do you think? What's the future of all of these different characteristics? And Holly, I'll start with you.
I see it too, right? You see some branded as better than organic, and I really think that's less to do about whether or not it's actually better than organic, and it's really, again, touching on the consumer. The consumer recognizes what organic means generally, right? They can see the organic, they can see certified organic brand on it, they understand the values. I think they can understand what they're paying for to an extent. They don't know that with indoor grown. They really don't. If we were to put CEA on a package, which we wouldn't do, but they would know, and in fact, it might actually hurt our marketing, right? They would look at that and go, gosh, I see, indoor purple lights, and this just feels very unnatural to me. And so I think you see a lot of that because there's, in my opinion, more overlap. There's more commonality than there are differences in what we're trying to solve for. But a consumer doesn't yet recognize that. And because there's no certification, there's not a lot of branding out there, individual companies are trying to do it on their own, right? You're both tasked with trying to help a consumer understand the value that they're getting with the way that you're bringing product to market. And we're doing that by saying it's local, it's pesticide-free, it's less water, less land, and trying to connect those values, which many of which are the same things that you're connecting with a consumer on already for organic. It's just that they understand it.
Yeah, I would say that it comes down to the consumer and staying laser focused on what people care about. Ultimately, with produce, it's really two things balanced by price. It's about, is it tasting good and is it healthy? And the nice thing about organic is it has deep roots in both of those core consumer benefits. So I think the problem with labeling something indoors, that through line just isn't there. And in fact, organic with no artificial fertilizers, no inorganic substrates, things like that, is actually a really strong claim that benefits consumers in a major way, and they know it somehow. Now, is there a better job that all of us need to be doing to tell the organic story to the consumers? Yes, and that's one of my frustrations. But at the end of the day, organic connotes so much of what matters to consumers, and if we can just deliver it for the right price, I think organic is around for the long run.
So you wanted a little controversy?
Yeah, let's go for it.
Sorry about that.
No, not at all. Look, I don't think many consumers actually understand what organic standards are. And I think if you were to do like a IP analysis of how many people click on the USDA website to read the regulations, you'd know that that's true. I think when we first started marketing a couple of years ago that we were pesticide or zero pesticides on our product, a lot of consumer feedback we got was, well, hang on, we thought there was no pesticide on organic produce, right? Isn't that what organics is? How are you different? So I think there is, important just to note, let's not overstate the level of consumer awareness of what actually organics actually is, but let's absolutely acknowledge that over 30 years, producers like you have earned the trust of the consumer through providing safe, nutritious produce year-round. It's a category that has taken more than 30 years to build. If those of you are old enough to remember back to standards like BioGrow and Demeter, and before it became federalized from a standard standpoint in the US, it's taken immense investment to build this category, and it's got value and it's got cachet for sure. And I think growers like Solely and others who are pursuing this are doing a great job of building up this important category. Consumers, though, as you said, Matt, I think will exercise their own judgments in choosing what they want to buy. And I think indoor growers should look to, and Tom, this is very relevant to what you're doing, look to build standards that are third-party verifiable, that are authentic, and then the market will decide what it cares about. We believe clean label is an advantage that we have in indoor growing that we should look to maximise. My comment earlier about being able to produce zero heavy metal ingredients for baby food, for example, or for juices or for smoothies. Being able to produce product diversity, these are things that frankly we're going to keep investing in and look to obviously benefit from consumer advantage over time. But this is a very young category, as Molly was saying. I think there's a ton of work to do to educate around what are the advantages. And I think one of the things we need to do is also focus on getting standards so it's not the Wild West. We know for a fact we don't use pesticides, but how does the consumer know that other than the fact that we're asserting it? So that this is a long haul, I think, exercise to build a new category. But we see that as an opportunity for sure, as something that we'd like to do. We're not an organic producer, although we could be. But we're putting our efforts and focus really around different things from a value proposition at the consumer level.
So where do you think this is all heading, this CEA space? If you had to look into the future, 5 years, 10 years, where will we be as a category? Molly?
Well, it's funny. What I would have said 5 years ago is different than I would have said today. So the cycle of innovation is fast. There's a lot of players entering the marketplace, more than I think will make it, right? There's a ton of different technologies out there. There's lots of different styles. I think diversity in that is going to survive. I think many of the companies are not. And so I think those that are really focused on the consumer first and what brings value to the marketplace, what causes people to say yes to buying, is going to make sense, and it's going to come down to cost. Right? Can we justify the investments that we've put into this space? And so I think consolidation is one that we're going to continue to see, and innovation. And I think I heard some really neat things yesterday morning just about the value of having other growers out to your farm and sharing those best practices, conventional to organic, grower to grower, and I would say indoor to outdoor. You know, some of the things that you've heard here are not uncommon. Many indoor farms are taking what we learned working in outdoor and trying to apply that. You know, even this growing conditions and thinking about, you know, movement and fans on the plants and how do you stress them to make them healthy and robust. You know, those lessons learned aren't stop, and so I think the collaboration between indoor and outdoor is critical.
Rama?
Well, gosh, I had a different opinion on things 5 months ago, than 5 years. 5 years is an absolute eon in technology innovation timelines. You know, I've actually been a venture investor for the last 15 years in more than 40 companies, a bunch of them in companies that are partnered with Western growers, companies, for example. And so if I go back 5 years, in the last 5 years alone, about $6 billion in venture capital has gone into indoor growing. Don't use the term CEA, by the way, because I think it's an industry-specific term, not to rain on our panel, but I agree, no one's running out to go, let me get my CEA strawberries. So, you know, I think if you think about indoor agriculture is really the way, I think it's a less jargonistic way to think about this. Indoor agriculture as a category isn't just vertical farming. It is fermentation technologies using precision microbes to ferment for food and non-food ingredients, everything from collagen to dairy products. It's also cultivation technologies being used to produce meat alternatives, sometimes by detractors called fake meat, cultured meat, lab-grown meat, however you want to describe it. Those three categories together have taken $12 billion in the last 5 years. You have to be some kind of pessimist to think that that level of, and this is not to build facilities, this is to do the R&D, right, to be able to then build facilities. That's what we've been doing for 8 years. We didn't go off and build a bunch of facilities that don't pencil economically and then hope we could catch up on the R&D cycle. It's tempting to do it, but it's the wrong way to go about doing it. And so amongst that $12 billion worth of investment, we are going to see a transformation of plant-based production, of dairy, of beef, of most actually animal proteins. And it's going to be against the backdrop of rising concern and regulation around climate impact, around water use. You know, the focus on GHG is, I think, fine, but actually the bigger focus for this industry is actually water and water arbitrage and what water can we actually count on. Of course, climate impact is driving water, both availability, when it turns up and where it turns up on a global basis. New Zealand just had its wettest winter ever and its warmest winter. Warm and wet, bad combination for produce growers down there. Prices off the chart for leafy greens, prices off the chart for tomatoes, because a lot of those crops got destroyed. Winter crops got destroyed, and so there was a huge supply mismatch in a country you don't normally think of as having food supply mismatches. So I think, you know, regulatory is going to be at a national, international level. It's going to be sharper and sharper in focus. You know, there's no one left really on either side of the political spectrum going, there's no such thing as climate change. 5 years ago, there were plenty of them. Like those went away one heat wave at a time, one fire season at a time. And so 5 years from now, I can't even imagine. But I say this, I think indoor is going to continue to attract capital as an asset class for those operators who can prove unit economics and return on investment. There is a lot of capital available for scaling. That's really where we're focused, right? So building facilities that actually prove the economics so we can build a lot more of them. And I'd say the industry is bifurcated. So I think there's huge opportunity for the greenhouse players doing what Matt's team are doing to essentially take a proven technology and scale it rapidly across areas where there are clear supply mismatches already. Equally, I think there will be a small handful of successful verticals who can prove a new economic platform for growing a diverse range of crops, often with different value propositions that we can sell to the consumer. And the other thing we haven't talked so much about is deep integration with strategic partners. We're working very closely with Walmart. They invested in our last round. We're ultimately looking at also being able to build facilities directly for retailers as well too, which may not make some of the folks in this room happy, but it's time to get aboard the train.
Matt, what do you think?
Yeah, so you know, we were out there just raising money this last year. We have not been a huge raiser of capital, but we did because we're scaling right now. And there's a lot of appetite out there, but there's a lot of skepticism. Let me talk about the three things that are worries on the part of investors and others about the sort of CEA business, and specifically vertical farms like us. Number one, the environmental footprint is great with water and land use and all sorts of other things like that, pesticide runoff, you name it. But the electricity consumed is a real issue. So we need the grid to go green, just like the electric car industry and everybody else does. That problem is somebody else's problem, but it's a problem that needs to be taken care of. And if it isn't, there's going to be a lot of backlash against using electricity instead of sunlight to grow stuff. So there's a real challenge there. New York Times wrote about that last summer. Second big challenge is crop variety. I talked about the sort of baby green thing. This industry, and both these companies here are working on it, are trying to expand the number of crops that we can grow, because that's an important thing that has to happen. If we don't go beyond baby greens and basil, we're never going to matter. And that's a really important thing for all of us. The third thing is cost. And what we found was that our secret to raising money and being oversubscribed last summer was to have the lowest cost and actually growing below the cost of field for the crops that we grow. We demonstrated that that was, in fact, what we have been doing and what we will continue to do even more as we scale. Quality has to be there. That's the basics. But having that cost return thing is absolutely critical, and then it simply becomes a decision. Do you invest in farms and land with all of the risk priced into that, or do you do CEA? Do you do vertical farms? We actually think vertical farms is a huge unlock, even versus greenhouses. 1/10 the amount of labor versus a greenhouse. That shows up in our numbers. So we think that there's an incredible opportunity if our industry can go after cost structure and stay focused on the variety and the quality that the consumer wants.
Great. Well, we've got time for just one or two questions. So here in the first row.
No, Mike, I'll speak loudly. This is for Plenty primarily. When you started with your vision, was one of your first thoughts is, I'm not going to go organic? Or was it as you were developing and becoming who you are today, did it become apparent? Did it become apparent to you that organics was going to be a tough nut to deal with along the way? So the last question is, in your thinking, you clearly said you're not in the organic space now, but do you have room in your thinking down the road when you have achieved all that you want to achieve, that organic might become part of your program?
Yeah, great question. We actually, as a test, and actually did get organic certification. So we can produce in an organic certified way for leafy greens. We haven't tested for the other crops, but our system is unique in that we literally can measure every variable within the farm. We have no human hand touching our product from seed all the way through to harvest. It's completely automated. So it means you can actually measure, so when you get audited, you can measure every single input and every step through the farm. So it's a conscious choice at this point to not go through organic certification. We don't see use a metaphor here, the juice being worth the squeeze today. But having said that, could we in the future? It's certainly it's an option we could pursue. Yeah.
Thank you.
Another question? Yes.
How does local play into all this? Does local and CEA go together? Is it built into your cost model that you're offsetting freight? If you could explain that a little bit.
Yeah.
Say two things, right? You're offsetting freight, but you're improving the freshness. When you think about the days it takes to run from the West Coast all the way to the East Coast, you're cutting out 5 days in that supply chain. And so that's 5 days more freshness for that consumer.
That's right.
So,
Exactly.
yeah, so you've got both a quality component, but also a cost component, right? As you guys have watched what's happened over the last 2 years, certainly in this industry, but also just as a consumer, it's very expensive to get product to your house, right? So if you think about the local component, there's those two pieces, cost and quality.
But when you look at it from a cost standpoint, are you figuring that freight savings?
Of course.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Our Richmond facilities, with 1 day haul of 100 million consumers. So, that's clearly why we've sort of anchored on a very large facility there. Just also to a point Matt raised earlier, I'm less concerned, frankly, given where we're doing locational selection on energy availability. You know, Dominion Energy, who are the tier 1 utility there, have built terawatts of power for the data center industry. Virginia's got more data center capacity than most of the other states on the East Coast put together. So there is no shortage of very low cost and increasingly renewable energy. If you ask me the question, what would you rather take the arbitrage on? Trying to find more low-cost renewable energy or trying to find more water? Which one do you think? So,
One more question. Anybody? No, it looks like it's time to wrap up. So let me thank the panel very much. We're right on time. Great job, everybody. Please join me in thanking our panel.